It's NFC South or die.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis, Aaron Freeman, and Tori McElhaney. Today's episode's brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, guys, the first wave of free agency is in the books. How'd the Falcons fare in the first week? And what does free agency look like for them a little over a month out from the draft? And the Falcons are really letting Tori cook. So let's get into it. So again, we are 1 week into free agency. Jarvis, how have your expectations changed for the Falcons in 2024 when you look at some of the moves they've already made?
It's NFC South or die. Like, that's where I'm at with it. I mean, this pretty much, because when you look around the division, I think it was kind of ironic that we have these above average quarterbacks who will put up some nice numbers, but, you know, from a global view, they're not viewed as guys who can get you to the Super Bowl and potentially win it. And you got Derek Carr, you have Kirk Cousins here in Atlanta, and then you have Baker Mayfield down there in Tampa, and then Carolina they're just gonna be at the bottom of the barrel, and we won't get into those guys because we know exactly where they'll be at the end of the season in the bottom of the division. So I just think that it's teams that know that this division is up for grabs, so they're willing to, you know, not try to go for the gusto and get a face of the franchise for the next 10 to 15 years. So I think right now where my expectations are for this team to make sure that they win a division and then figure out the rest from there.
And Aaron, what about you? Have your expectations changed at all? And if they have, how have they, now that we've gotten through this first almost first week of free agency?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the Falcons went into free agency basically saying they're a quarterback away, and a week in, they've basically operated like a team that's a quarterback away. We've seen them add a couple of wide receivers, but nobody that I think, you know, no offense to Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore, or Ray McCloud, but I don't think anybody that they added is like really moving the needle as far as adding playmakers there. Just sort of a solid sort of supporting cast there. And, you know, now the Falcons are sitting here with not a lot of cap space, having spent a large chunk of that on Kirk Cousins, and maybe done in free agency, maybe a couple of sort of minor moves here or there, but they basically, if that's the case, basically said, hey, we just need to figure out the quarterback position and maybe rework the wide receiver, and then all the other issues we can address in the draft. And, you know, that's a choice. I don't know if I am 100% on board with that, because I felt like there were maybe some other issues that they needed to deal with this offseason elsewhere on the roster. But, you know, I think they're, you know, operating like, hey, we're a quarterback away. And, you know, I think, as Jarvis stated, in this division, that's probably a true statement.
Indeed. And Tori, now that we're a week away from Kirk Cousins, that, you know, that when the news really first hit, what are your thoughts as far as your expectations, but not just Kirk Cousins, Tori, but some of the moves that have even been made throughout the course of the first week of free agency?
Yeah, I think for me, my expectations didn't necessarily change, because I felt like the Falcons underperformed last year and didn't meet my expectations for them last year. So I almost have these like same expectations that I expect this team to be better, and I expect this offense to immediately be better. Like, that's the whole reason you dole out a contract like the one given to Kirk Cousins, because you immediately believe that this is a guy who can come in and change the way that your offense is producing. And for the Falcons to be where they want to be, i.e. winning games and being divisional champions, that's something that needed to change. So my expectation was kind of always that going in, regardless of what moves they made, the expectation was the same. And so I don't want that to seem like a cop-out answer or anything like that, but it truly is, I think, kind of where my mind is about where this organization is, where it's like, this organization should be competing at a higher level than what it did in 2023. And I already expected them to compete at a higher level in 2023, and they didn't. So that's kind of where I sit. And I also think that just kind of looking at the moves that were made in terms of using free agency to build up this wide receiver room, I thought that was a very interesting play. And also just kind of looking at the guys that they did go out and get, kind of how vastly different they look from the receivers that like an Arthur Smith coached offense looked like. You're talking about these big, long, lengthy, like 6'3", 250-pound receivers. And now you're looking at guys that are 6 foot and below that are just going to like outpace you.
Yeah. They're just going to outrun you.
That's very, very interesting. And I think it shows a little bit more of what this offense could look like with the understanding of what they've gone after so far. But I'm also with like Aaron. I think that this doesn't preclude them from being able to do other things in the draft. Specifically, I still am very high on the wide receivers in this draft class. I really like them. I think it's a really deep group that you could get a really good receiver early in the second round and feel pretty good about where you are.
Yeah, I think that second run on receivers is going to be a good look for the Falcons as well. I think they can pick someone up, and then it just becomes a competition. And I like that thought. Everybody step to the table, bring your A game if you want to be that guy receiving catches from Kirk Cousins this upcoming season. But like you all, I clearly from day one of when we started having the conversation last season about who's going to win the NFC South, it was far and away the Falcons. Like I never thought it was going to be anyone else until it wasn't. And so now I feel the same, kind of using Jarvis's words, NFC South or bust. At a minimum, it's the division. And at a max, I think, you have a ceiling to even go as far as the NFC championship, only because, I mean, you're doing a nice job of stacking just like other organizations, and you haven't really lost anything if we're being honest about it. So that makes me feel comfortable that the ceiling is still where it was last year and could creep even higher. Now, Aaron, when you look at, since you talked about the possibility of and having some intrigue around where the Falcons might go in the draft, sometimes we look at the moves that they've made or not made in free agency to see if maybe they give us tea leaves to tell us where the Falcons are going to go. So now Tori just mentioned it, 3 wide receivers at this point. So we're looking at that particular room, if you will, or that particular position group and how they're starting to stack there. But do you feel a little more confident that, starting to get a clearer picture of where they're going to go, especially in the first few rounds?
Yeah, I think so. I thought going into free agency, they would probably maybe address some of their issues in the secondary. And they haven't done that yet. So I think that's now become potentially a draft priority. But I think we all kind of thought going into the draft, that front seven was going to get addressed. That pass rush was going to get addressed. And I think in all likelihood, like that's probably the direction that they'll likely go in round 1. But I do think in rounds 2, 3, 4, in that range where they have a couple of picks, they're going to have to potentially address some of their holes in the secondary, with potentially two starting spots that are up for grabs at that opposite corner spot with AJ Terrell and an opposite safety spot opposite for Jesse Bates. So I think that's going to take some priority come April.
Yeah, and I got to say, Tori, my mind also went to a lot of it went to pass rush because we've now gotten the news, the confirmation that Aaron Donald is retiring. And you think about the possibility of having that number 8 pick and being able to go out there and get yourself a generational player, of which there could be some generational pass rushers in this draft. And I thought, wow. And so, I kind of got nostalgic, like, wonder if we'll be having this conversation 10 to 12 years from now about the Falcons having picked a generational defensive player. But do you feel like maybe the tea leaves are starting to show us just a little peek into what they're thinking?
I do. I mean, but here's the thing is that like with this regime specifically, I mean, I've been saying for 3 seasons that the Falcons needed to use their top 10 draft pick on an edge rusher. I've been saying it over and over again. And they've gone out and gotten an offensive weapon 3 times in a row. So I'm not like completely sold on, I'm also, if I'm being completely honest, I don't know if I'm completely sold on this edge rusher class. I don't think it's as deep as some of the other classes. So unless you feel like one of those top 3 guys is there and you feel like you have the opportunity to get the best edge rusher in the draft at number 8, I don't entirely know exactly how this is going to fall on the first night of the draft. And I just kind of go back and forth with it, because it's like, I feel like I've been burned in the past by saying that the Falcons like need to or should draft an edge rusher at number 8 overall, and they don't do it. And then I'm left being like, fine, I won't do it again. And then I do it again and I get burned again. So it's just kind of one of those things where I go back and forth on it. Like, could I see it? Absolutely. But I would have to feel really, really strongly about the potential of these top 3 edge rushers in the draft class.
I think that's too. And Jarvis, at this point, we hear far more about the run on quarterbacks at the top, the run on O linemen at the top, and the run on receivers at the top that will then dictate the next run on those 3 position groups. We don't hear as much about the edge rushers and sort of that, though, the ones that are bunched up, those 3, and then hearing a little bit more about what that second run is. And I think it's because of what Tori said, because the second run of that position group isn't as strong as the second run of those other 3 position groups. So all the focus then lies on those 3. But what are your thoughts as far as whether or not there is even, and I'm just going to remix my question slightly because I'm with Tori. Is there any snowball's chance in hell that these tea leaves are kind of sort of maybe possibly showing us pass rush?
I think so. I think so, because just because of the reason that you mentioned, right? You talk about quarterback, you talk about wide receiver, you talk about that tackle spot. We know those are very important positions, especially in today's league, right? We got quarterback number 1. I think tackles is 2, because you have to protect that investment, and then you got the guys that you throw on the football too. So, and there are some really good wide receivers in this draft. When you talk about Marvin Harrison Jr., you talk about Malik Neighbors, and you talk about Rome Odunze out of Washington. So, for those reasons, I feel like the Falcons are going to have their pick of those top 3. We're talking about Latu. We're talking about
Dallas
Turner and
Jared
Verse. So when you have those guys sitting right there, because just going through and just watching those guys, like, there are some, I feel like Latu has the best hands, like in this draft, like just from a repertoire standpoint or arsenal to go with third along with. So he's my favorite, but I love what Jared Verse brings to the table. So I really feel like it's skewing towards edge rusher, but like Tori said, I don't mind being wrong on that, because I will pound the table for an edge rusher till the day I Tori. So until they draft one, I'm gonna still keep saying that. But I feel
glad
like
we're all on the same page.
Oh yeah.
I would take a wide receiver just to see Jarvis freak out on
the meltdown of epic proportions.
Trust me, there will be a live session after they draft the wide receiver.
Because there was a bit of one. Don't get it twisted. There was a bit of one last year and the year before that and the year before that. But I think if it happens a 4th time, I think Jarvis will officially blow a gasket. And because did you see how his face lit up when he started talking about somebody laying hands on somebody? Scary how excited he gets about laying up the hands in that way.
Real quick, though, I think I just want to kind of finish this. So I think, though, there's a very slim chance, and it may grow as we get closer to the draft. I feel like corner is, I think Arizona something. I feel like corner, a guy like a Quinyon Mitchell, like he'll be, oh man, I feel like
I truly think that cornerback is one of those like sleeper positions for the Falcons right now.
And
I wouldn't be mad at it.
I think this core group of 4 would be okay with that. And man, if you can somehow like finagle and move back from that 8 spot and get yourself some capital with it, I mean, it could happen and still get a good guy at corner. I think we'd be excited about that too. I mean, here's the good thing. The Falcons are in the position to be able to have these conversations. So advantage Falcons, advantage Cherry Fontenot, advantage Raheem Morris. I really love that they're in the position like this. When we come back, let's talk about something we don't talk enough about, QB2. We're going to talk about that and where a guy who could have been QB1 for the Falcons has landed when we come back with the deep dive. Our episode of this Atlanta football party is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. Now, the offer is good through April 30th, and you can get started at Robinhood.com/boost. That's Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees do apply. And now I've got to share some legal info with you as well. This is a claim on that 3% as of Q1 2024 that was validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC is a member of the SIPC and is a registered broker-dealer. All right, guys. So we spent an inordinate amount of time that finally seemingly came to an end last Monday talking about QB1. But I think it's very intriguing as to what could possibly happen with where the Falcons go for QB2. So, Aaron, when you think about the latest on the backup situation for the Falcons, I kind of thought about it in two spaces. Number one is the obvious. Is Taylor Heinicke that guy who could be QB2, or is there another move coming? And we've gotten reports out of South Carolina that for their pro day, seems like the Falcons had a good contingent there, and they were pretty impressed with Spencer Rattler. So how do you kind of see things shaping up for the QB2 and maybe even QB3 situation? Because we know what we saw last year. I'm sorry, and I wanted to just share this. I'm sorry, Free. We know what we saw last season and how some teams went from QB1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and in the case of the Browns, QB5.
Yeah. I think the Falcons probably want to come out of the draft with a quarterback, but you know how the draft goes. It's very unpredictable. You don't know when those quarterbacks are going to go, on a run, and suddenly, QB4 goes off the board, 10 picks earlier than people thought, and all of a sudden everybody's like, okay, well, we got to get our guy now, and all of a sudden the Falcons, picking 10 spots too late, miss out on their guy. So I think that's probably why the Falcons have decided to keep Taylor Heinicke, who was due a $1.3 million roster bonus over the weekend, and they decided to give that to him, and that makes him now, I think, one of the highest paid backup quarterbacks in the NFL. I think his $9 million cap hit is like top 3 among backup quarterbacks currently in the NFL. And so I think the Falcons wanted to have, sort of an insurance policy there, just in the event that, the draft doesn't go the way that they want it to go, and they are able to get that sort of guy that probably is more the long-term answer at the QB2 spot that, eventually, if the development goes right, could be maybe penciled in as an heir apparent to Kirk Cousins, 3-4 years down the road, if they need to sort of make that turn. So I think the Falcons right now are just kind of hedging their bets right now with holding on to Taylor Heinicke. There are people on this coaching staff that Ken Zampese, who the Falcons hired as the senior offensive assistant, was Heinicke's quarterback coach for 3 years in Washington when he played his best football. So, I think there are people on this coaching staff that are fans of Taylor Heinicke, and he was consistently the best quarterback in Washington those 3 years, which doesn't speak a whole lot to the other quarterbacks in Washington. No offense to Taylor Heinicke, but, he wasn't out there lighting the world on fire, but he was playing at least serviceable football for those 3 years. And I think the Falcons are expecting him to do the same and continue to do the same, I should say, here in Atlanta.
What do you think, Tori?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Aaron was saying with, it's almost kind of like a better safe than sorry type of thing. I mean, I think that you always run the risk of the draft is always a crapshoot in terms of quarterback evaluations. Let's just be honest. The hardest thing to do, I think, across any sports landscape, and I've probably said this before, is evaluating quarterback talent. And you honestly get to a point where it's like, how confident do you feel? You know what your ceiling and floor with Taylor Heinicke is. That's not a question. That's why you have him as a backup quarterback, is because he's a known rather than an unknown. So it's the safer bet of every option that I think you have in terms of a backup quarterback. Now, is the fact that, I mean, they would have, if they were to release him prior to June 1, they would save $7 million toward the cap. That is a lot of money that they could do a lot of things with. And that's something that I have a hard time reconciling, having someone with a cap hit of $9 million who is you would hope never going to see the field, because you hope that Kirk Cousins is going to be healthy and able, and that they're going to see success. So from a monetary standpoint, from a financial standpoint, I do wonder kind of like what moves from a contract perspective you are able to make. And I know that there will probably be contract restructures for various of those big contracts. I'm talking like Chris Lindstrom, Jake Matthews, Grady Jarrett, like those guys at the very, very top of your cap percentages. But I don't put that out of the realm of possibility that they have to be able to move some money around in order even to just like sign their draft class. And having someone with that level of monetary like weight on them is something that I'm having. Like, I just feel like you have to do something. You have to figure something out. And if you want to keep Taylor Heinicke, you keep him, and because he is the safest bet of any option I think that you would have viable to you.
And to be honest with you, Tori, I think there is I feel like as much as a crapshoot is that the draft is when it comes to drafting quarterbacks, because we know, like, I feel like there's going to be some overdrafting going on, and there might be somebody 100%. Because specifically like the 2021 draft, when I think now that Justin Fields has officially been traded. Yeah. Like none of those guys that were drafted in the first round are on their original team, which is
this feels, I'm not going to lie, like this year started to feel like that the farther and farther down the line and the closer we're getting to the draft, like how these quarterbacks are being evaluated across the league, it feels very similar to that draft class. Not to say that none of these quarterbacks that are going to be drafted in the first round this year are going to end up exactly like what we've seen the 2021 draft class look like, but it does kind of feel like that right now.
Yeah, he definitely had those vibes, because anytime you're talking about Bo Nix being drafted in the first round, like I'm like, okay, let me see that. I need to see that like on tape. But I think overall, like I think March 28th is an interesting date for me, because that's when Michael Penix has his pro day, and we all know all of the accolades that he was receiving for how he threw at the combine. And I think that's going to be an interesting one where he falls, because we know that certain guys like J.J. McCarthy being talked about being drafted in the first round. But if he drops to the second round and the Falcons just so happen to trade back and get an extra second round pick or so, I would take a flyer on him, because I really feel like I'm with you, Tori. That whole $7 million piece doesn't sit well in my soul. I feel like that money can be allocated somewhere else, and you can get some value. You can potentially even bring a guy like Bud Dupree back later on. Right. I know T.
Yeah, so you want to mess with my soul? Okay. Go on.
See, you might be train of thought, but I think overall that money can be used in a better place. Let's just kind of leave it at that. But I also. I feel like the Falcons can set themselves up to get a nice quarterback if they were to trade down, because there are going to be some guys that's going to fall. There are going to be some guys who are going to panic. Some teams are going to panic behind them. If a guy like a Rome Odunze falls, is available at 8th, like, do you take him, or do you take this second round pick from a wide receiver thirsty team that's willing to give you that second round pick and maybe a mid to late round pick to move up, or maybe even another pick in the next draft? So I think
here's the thing. I truly think that this is going to be a draft where we see teams freak out when all the quarterbacks start going. And that's honestly the best thing that could happen for the Falcons in my opinion, is that these other teams start getting like in their head about like, like these quarterbacks are not going to fall. We're not going to be able to get them. Like you think about a team like Denver, like that's in that, what are they, 11? No, they're not 11. Wherever they
are.
But like 12, right? Yeah. So a team right there where you're sitting like, you're hoping that someone falls to that point in time. But if it does feel like these runs start happening, and we do see runs, we saw in the year that Drake London was drafted, we saw that really long, like wide receiver run after the Falcons took Drake at number 8. Like it happens. There's these trends that happen on the night of the draft that you can't plan for. And then it's like all hell's breaking loose, because you just then you have teams that are like, well, we need this guy. We have to have this guy. We're sold on this guy. We thought he would be there. Like I love it. It's like the fun chaos of it is so fun.
It's going to be utter chaos. But speaking of chaos, we saw some chaotic and rather interesting movement in the QB space for free agency that is probably still going to dictate what happens in the draft. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we come back in What's Next. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is also brought to you by Game Time. So Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code Vegas100 with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So last minute tickets, they got it. Flash deals, they got it. Zone deals, they got that too. And lowest price guarantees along with event cancellation protection, job loss protection as well. So you can see the view from your seat before you buy, and you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. That's their definition of last minute seats, and that's a pretty good look. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, again, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms do apply, but just download the Game Time app and use code VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets with the lowest price guaranteed. And if you're not going to the game, you can also use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. So over the weekend, Tori, there were reportedly 4 teams inquiring about a trade, but ultimately Justin Fields' representation reportedly asked for him not to be traded to anyone except the Steelers. Okay. The Bears in return got a conditional 2025 6th-round draft pick for Fields. And it was interesting because you look at that deal, which I think was a shocker to just about everybody. And then you look at the deal for Desmond Ridder, where the Falcons got Rondale Moore in exchange for Dez, and you're thinking, wow, a couple things that came to mind for me, Tori, which of course I always disclose, Steelers fan, was this the right or best fit for Justin Fields ultimately? But also you kind of look at it and say, okay, Des Ridder, Justin Fields, and you kind of even look at that Mac Jones trade and say, wow, did the Bears get enough for Fields? And the Falcons are kind of still winning.
Yeah, no, I think if you would have told me 2 years ago that this, like what we're seeing playing out now with Justin Fields and Desmond Ridder and all these other quarterbacks, that whole class, I don't know if I would have believed you in the moment. And I was very surprised when I saw it was a conditional 6. Like that to me was shocking. And then there's a part of me that's like, you know what, like maybe I'm missing something. And I think like there are a lot of like talking heads that really, really like Justin Fields, and you know, we're in Atlanta, we hear about Justin Fields all the time, and I just feel like, I mean, there very obviously was not a market for him. So it got to the point where I go back to like when the Falcons parted ways with Matt Ryan, and it was like they needed to like they honestly just needed to take that dead money on the chin, and basically did kind of right by Matt Ryan and being like, yo, like go where you want to go, we'll get what we can get for you. But also at the exact same time, it's like Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh is not a combination that and I'm trying to be like sitting here thinking about what it can look like. And I don't have a clear-cut answer. And I was not expecting this to be the move, like at all. And I don't know. It's interesting to see that like the Falcons got someone like Rondale Moore, who his numbers haven't been fantastic with Arizona, but there's a lot of value in this guy being a 2nd-round pick and kind of being this gadget guy for the Falcons within a new offensive scheme with a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. It seems like a win-win deal for the Falcons with like a really big potential upside. So it's just kind of like it's a lot to me. It's I don't know how to make heads or tails of it, and I wish that I had more like knowledge on what people really truly thought about Justin Fields. Which honestly, maybe this is the answer. When it's a conditional round pick, maybe that is the answer.
Well, see, I think that the Falcons, we were we've been talking the last couple of weeks about certain teams, right? The Falcons being one of them, the Bears being another, and kind of being careful not to look desperate or not to overplay your hand. I think the Falcons actually played their hand perfectly, and it ended up working out for them. Yes, I know Kirk Cousins came at a pretty penny, but I still think it's going to work out in their favor because of how they were able to maneuver and get others. And I think that with Justin Fields, that's why I kept saying the words reportedly, because I'm not buying the whole thing. Well, his rep said, that he wasn't really interested in those 4 teams. And the Steelers may have been his number one choice of the quote unquote suitors, but also the Bears coming out and basically saying, hey, we kind of wanted to do right by Justin. Oh, you mean the guy you haven't done right by in about, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or 2, or even since he got in the league because you keep changing his OCs and you basically kind of put him on the chopping block before the season started. I just think that there's more to that story than what we're being told right now. And I think they overplayed their hand. And I think ultimately speaking, the Steelers are like, you know what? You better take the 6th round conditional pick that could go to 4th if, he has more than 51% of the snaps, because that's probably the best you're going to get at this time. I think that's a trend that teams have to be careful of as well, because if you overplay your hand, you're going to end up getting pennies on the dollar, which unfortunately is kind of what the Falcons saw with how things ended up with Matt Ryan.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is, I find it truly interesting is the fact that I feel like there's that overall narrative about, him being valued a certain way because of the 6th round pick piece. I think it's more layers to it, especially when we talk about the NFL, right? Especially when we talk about the most important position on the field. And I think that when you look at what Ryan Poles did, I don't know if y'all remember, we go back to like the beginning of this thing. Ryan Poles was reportedly wanting a 1st round pick. We all know that's not going to happen because, like, look at the money. Just look at the money, right? Because you got, like, I think it was like $3.4 million in 2024, and then you had to figure out whether or not you're going to pick up that 50 option. More than likely, you weren't going to do that. That's $24 million. So essentially, it's 1 year and try to figure out what you got going on. So that's why I feel like this situation behind Russell Wilson, although Russell Wilson in any locker room at this point in his career is just weird to me because he's just a weird individual. And every locker room that he's touched, there always seem to be weird things to come out about him, like him wanting a personal trainer, having his own office in the building. It was just so weird about what's going on with. So I feel like him going to where Mike Tomlin is, I like if he can't get it right with Mike T, I feel like he's not going to get it right anywhere. And I feel like that's the same for Justin Fields because, and like T mentioned at the top of this segment, talking about Arthur Smith having to deal with all of this. This is going to be a very interesting offseason, I say, because Arthur Smith reportedly had went down to see Kenny Pickett to start trying to, figure out this thing. And for him to not even be there anymore, he's not even on the roster anymore. And you got 2 new guys you got one guy that you had no interest in drafting. And then you got Russell Wilson, who probably no one had any interest outside of saving a poop ton of money to bring him in to be the starting quarterback. So, yeah, it is going to be very interesting how this thing plays out in Pittsburgh this year. And I think as we go along, we're going to find out that, hey, it wasn't necessarily Justin Fields' talent that drew that 6th round pick. It was probably more so the surrounding circumstances, in my opinion.
Likely. Yeah, Aaron. And it's interesting how things come full circle, and maybe full circle head scratching, but full circle nonetheless.
Yeah. The Pittsburgh situation, Tia, I don't want to get into a Steelers gripe session, but that whole situation now is weird. Like it's
we don't have enough time on this show to break down.
Wilson and Fields are on 1-year deals. Tomlin, like everybody in Pittsburgh is calling for his job, and like if this doesn't go right, like those calls are only going to get louder. So like this is just a weird recipe that they've put together of personalities and Arthur Smith's offense and guys that don't necessarily, so it's very combustible. But if anybody's going to be able to sort of stick this landing, I guess you're going to bet on Mike Tomlin to get it right. But they've had a very interesting offseason, and I'm fascinated to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, well, Jarvis, if he can handle the crazy bees, Roethlisberger Ben. And yeah, Antonio, that's what I was gonna say. Antonio Brown and whoever, Le'Veon Bell, I think they can handle just about anybody. But shout out to also just I know we didn't get an opportunity to talk about it, but like we alluded to before with the Falcons picking up Ray McCloud and also re-signing Kentavious Street. Think that's a good look. I think we all thought before he went down to injury last season that he was a nice addition mid-season for the Falcons. Well, listen, the conversation will continue because free agency we know is going to bring more and more moves, and we know more moves are going to be made as we lead up to the draft to kind of give us some tea leaves to that. Thanks for stopping by the Atlanta Football Party. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow for the Atlanta Football Party, the Dogs edition.